Bueno, gracias por la invitación. Déjenme un par de palabritas personales e institucionales. Para el Instituto IEP es la verdad que una gran satisfacción que se haya hecho este enorme seminario, la verdad que es muy impresionante, digamos, el equipo de epistemología que integra el instituto haya liderado esta actividad. La verdad que para nosotros es un gran orgullo. Y bueno, que nos hayan dado la oportunidad de participar en una revista, más todavía. Ok, déjame cambiar de idioma. Saying that we are very happy that we were invited to contribute to this journal and to specify, I'm going to talk, of course, not as an epistemologist, which I'm not, but as an economist. But the paper has had some philosophical contribution, so I hope that what I'm going to say is not going to distort the philosophical contribution. So my topic is a topic about something which I think is obviously concretely important and relevant for economics, understanding macroeconomic crisis. And on the other hand, from the point of view of the practicing macroeconomist, one finds that dealing with this sort of phenomena brings questions which have, I think, epistemological implications, which are really deep, or I would say they look deep to the macroeconomist. But I think that one, by the very nature of the topic, one has to deal with very significant questions about how one goes about analyzing systems in evolution, on the one hand, and on the other hand, how people in real life, agents, economic agents, deal with deciding behavior, forming expectations in evolving environments. So let me try to develop, but the message is this, that in a sense, when working on this kind of problems, the macroeconomist is a sort of applied epistemologist, because the economist has to struggle with the question of how do people behave when they are facing an environment that is significantly changed. Okay, so a couple of very quick specifications of what the problem is. We are talking about debt crisis. That is, we are talking with the family of events which one can associate with the depression of the 1930s, with the various crises in Latin America, particularly in Argentina, like the one we had in 2001, 2002, the Japanese crisis, the recent crisis in the US and in the Eurozone. And I would like to argue that by its very nature, these episodes have their idiosyncrasies and characteristics which make them individual animals, so to speak. And on the other hand, they have some very precise or specific common elements, and I would like to argue that the common element, or one of the main common elements of all these cases, is the fact that there is a widespread disappointment of expectations. When you have a debt crisis, essentially you have what we can call broken promises, contracts are unfulfilled, people go bankrupt, people who thought they had the future, an economic future, find that they have lost a large amount of resources, and something which, from the point of view of the macroeconomist, always comes back to mind is every time we have an episode like this, we ask for lessons. I mean, the seminar lessons from the blah 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 crisis are just a very common feature, which means that if we talk about lessons from the episode, it's that we feel implicitly that there is something to learn, which means that we think implicitly that what we knew before was not right. So, question, if we want to understand crisis, we have to understand how what people believed turned out to be wrong. So the central question is the emergence of large-scale mistakes. So, the macro-analysis of crisis, from the point of view of the practical macroeconomic analysis, must address the actual strategies of agents which they use to interpret and forecast the environment and their fallibility. So in a sense, and I would like to argue a bit later that the fallibility is not something which is, let's say, eccentric to the common sense opinions of the time, but the fallibility involves a prevalent criteria and prevalent beliefs about how the system works. So in a sense, there is this tension that macroeconomic theory has to explain how people acting according to the prevalent macroeconomic theory turn out to be wrong. So, and of course, the topic is linked, and when you look at the discussions that the recent crisis has brought about, it's clear that the reference has emerged about how to deal with uncertainty, how useful are probabilistic arguments for the depiction, the representation of deep uncertainties, how right or wrong are the assumptions that we are dealing with a system of constant parameter, or a system which has the ergodic property, and of course it's more or less clear, at least intuitively, that a system which has this sort of crisis, it would be hard to understand using an ergodic assumption. Now, at the same time, the facts lead us to put in question the use of probabilistic arguments, the ergodic assumption, and so on, but at the same time, the macroeconomics in recent decades has been dominated by the rational expectations assumption. I'm not going to go into a general critique of rational expectation because it's beside the point here. I think that clearly that's one of the assumptions that has to be reconsidered in the light, I would say, both of the logic and the facts of macroeconomic crisis. Because rational expectations does assume, in fact, that there is nothing to learn. That is, that everything that people don't know is part of some sort of irreducible noise, natural noise, so to speak, in the system. So that there's no regret involved in any decision. Maybe shocked by some sort of random event, but that shouldn't lead to a reconsideration of previous plans. So I'm going to talk about some features of crisis, some elements about forming expectations in changing environments, and I would like to address one specific issue very quickly. I mean, it has often been said that, or the argument emerges often, that what you see in a bubble that leads to a crisis is some sort of irrational exuberance, as Greenspan said, or Schiller, the recent Nobel Prize, has named in one of the books. My feeling is that that would be too simple in a sense to understand the crisis, and the problem, in fact, is to understand how cool-headed and quite serene people get into real trouble by being wrong. Okay? And then I will finish with some reflections about what is left from the point of view of macroeconomic analysis. This I have already said. Big recessions, bankruptcies, maybe bank runs. No two crises are identical. That's more or less trivial because we are not going to make the same mistakes. We're going to make a different mistake, and we're going to have a crisis. Next crisis will be different from this because we're going to, obviously, this crisis is going to change behavior. So, in fact, there is an inherent dynamics in behavior given by learning. So, it's very hard to think that history will repeat itself. So, one of the things that one sees is, if you take, for example, the crisis in the US, you find a number of arguments which, are, of course, seem relevant for the specific case, like lax monetary policies. Greenspan was overly expansionary in his monetary policies. There were lots of very smart people creating very complicated financial instruments which even they did not understand, and that turned out to be not exactly ways to spread risk, but they were actually ways to create risk. There was fraud. There were people selling bonds that probably they knew would be hard to repay. There was redistribution of income in favor of the very top of the distribution and against the majority of the population, and maybe the credit expansion was one way to compensate for the loss of demand that redistribution was implying, and so on. All of that, I think, is part of the story in the US. But you can find crises in countries that had very constrained monetary systems. Greece, for example, has no monetary policy at all, and it would be hard to blame the European Central Bank in Frankfurt for the Greek crisis. We had crises in unsophisticated monetary financial sectors. We had a very strong crisis with a financial system which didn't know anything about derivatives, basically. Greece, for example, you find that in the boom period, income distribution did improve. So, I mean, the connection between worsening income distribution and the process that leads to a crisis is not at least necessary, and so on and so on and so on. Often you find current account deficits in before crisis, but for example, Japan had current account surplus before the crisis. So, if you want to identify, if you want the core, the common core of all these cases, one has to go beyond this sort of episodic explanations that may be relevant, of course, for the specific case, but are not the general feature of the crisis. Let me, for example, and this has been known I mean, it's not something that we have invented now. It has been known for some time, although it sometimes gets forgotten. There is this very nice phrase by Irving Fisher, the famous 1933 paper on debt deflations, and he was struggling with the fraud explanations of the crisis. By the way, he had several things to apologize for in the crisis, by the way, but anyhow. And I like it very much, because when it is too late, the dupes discover scandals. That is, someone was duped. That means there was a mistake there. But probably these frauds could never have become so great without the original starters of real opportunities to invest lucratively. That is, people perceived that there were real things going on that would warrant higher expectations of return. And there is always a very real basis for the new era psychology, and that reminds us of this time is different, the phrase is in the title of Rogoff and Reinhardt. There's always a very real basis for the new era psychology before it runs away with all its victims. We wouldn't write like that now, but it sounds really vivid. So, if you take the series, and I think it encapsulates a very real general feature of crisis, what characterizes these episodes is the widespread belief that some new conditions in the economic system will be able to deliver stronger growth in order to validate stronger growth, higher incomes that will eventually validate the current decisions to spend more and to get into debt or to lend. That is, lending and borrowing decisions in one way or the other which turn out to be wrong, are based on some view about the sustainability of a new, stronger growth rate. So, and that I would like to stress, wealth misperceptions are at the core of macroeconomic crisis. So in a sense, the crisis means, and I will show you in a minute some little graphs about it. A crisis means that you are not as wealthy as you thought you were, and people who are not as wealthy as they thought they were possibly have trouble repaying their debts, and that's it. I mean, that's, I think, is in a nutshell what a crisis means. Now, and you see that when we are talking about sustainability of the current account, sustainability of the credit expansion or whatever, we are talking about the future generation of incomes that would validate or not current decisions. In a sense, it's impossible to say that fundamentals that we observe now make or may not a certain current behavior sustainable, because the current behavior will or will not be sustainable according to things that will happen in the future. So, in a way, when an analyst says, I see that this behavior or this evolution of the economy is or is not sustainable, what the analyst in fact is saying is, I believe or I don't believe that the beliefs of the agents are correct or not. So in a sense, it's always a second order, if you want, belief. The other thing is trend cycle interaction. So the basic thing is, you see an economy expanding, great moderation, like the phrase went in the US in recent years, and you have to decide, well, great moderation is the sign of a strong future trend, or it is just a boom that we're going to be reversed. So, and on the other hand, when the boom maybe gets reversed, that cycle possibly has effects on the future trends, because the economy has to deal with getting rid, in a sense, of the wrong decisions that have been made in the law. So, again, crises are memorable episodes. They get in people's mind, they trigger search for lessons, and they trigger the recognition that the facts do not work like we thought they would, and learning behavior. So, now, that in fact, you see it that way, and suppose one is dealing with very practical problems, let's say of financial regulation or macroeconomic policy, and one asks, prudential behavior, prudential regulation, prudential macroeconomic policies. Any such thing has to take into account, and will be based possibly in a very significant way, on the chances one attributes to a new crisis in the future. So the problem, how probable, how likely is a new crisis in 10, 20 years? Now the question is, what sample of data you may use to have an idea of the likelihood of a new crisis. Two things. One, you have to understand if past data are relevant for future behavior, which is a really deep problem. And on the other hand, even if you thought that past data are going to be relevant, that is, if you want, the frequency of crisis in the past tells you something about the potential frequency of crisis in the future, still you have the problem that the number of crises is not enormously large. So these are infrequent events, rare events, so to speak, so that having statistics on that, unless one counts, let's say, the tulip bubble in Amsterdam in the 17th century, should I take into account? I don't know. I mean, maybe. But that sort of very deep problem of induction, if you say, appears in very practical ways when one reads with this. This is Argentina. Let me show you Greece. This, I always show it, but this is the actual GDP of Greece. This is the GDP that the IMF was forecasting in the year 2007 for Greece. So you see, and I mean, it's not only the IMF. I mean, I think that very competent people, if you want, were assuming that this would be the case. And this is 2010, so we are going to be possibly around here. So the discrepancy between what we expected in 2000, or what, let's say, an influential opinion like that of the IMF expected in 2007 for the Greek economy and what the Greek economy is going to look like is about 30%. 30%. So in fact, what you see is that this country has to pay the debts of a country that thought it was the other one. It's very, I mean, the graphic, I think, speaks for itself. And the problem that they got wrong, and the problem that we got wrong several times, is extrapolating a trend that turns out to be a cycle. And it's clear that when you integrate this discrepancy here, what you find is an enormous or a large discrepancy between the wealth that people could have predicted given the past trend and the trend that and the wealth that they actually have. So, I mean, the elements of what we were talking about are there. And in the sense, macro crises are associated with changing perception about the wealth of nations. That is, if Greece was maybe thought to be a shining emerging economy that would converge to the European average because. And now Greece is perceived as a hopeless or more or less hopeless economy full of people who don't like to work and all this folklore. You see how, in a way, the same country placed in the same place with the same institutions and the same resources and the same people is evaluated in terms of its potential to generate income in enormously different ways. So we have changed the way in which we interpret, or the markets and the agents interpret the same evidence. The model has changed. So in a sense, what this crisis reveals is a very deep change in the model of the world that was used before and after. Question. Now note that, in a sense, the arguments that could rationalize the extrapolation of the trend are arguments based on changes in the economy. So, in fact, if you asked what is so great about Greece that now it was a relatively poor country in the south of Europe, and why do we forecast that it's going to become the average European country? And say, well, no, it has changed, it has reformed its policy, it has got into the euro, it has adopted the European institutions, and so on and so on and so on. So the new world is going to be different to the old world. So in fact, what we are doing is we are speculating in both senses, intellectual and actual, speculating on changes in the economy. That is, we are anticipating a behavior which is based on new facts and new conditions about the economy. And that brings the question, how do these people understand the future evolution of an economy which they know by construction, if you want, is structurally different? How do we deal, how do we make expectations given structural change? And that turns, I think, raises very complicated question about what a respected colleague of mine calls the uses of the past. What are the uses of the past? To what extent can we use the past to forecast the future? To what extent that past is relevant to this future? Okay. And we're going to this. In macro, we always talk figuratively about forward-looking expectations. Now, forward-looking expectation is a funny expression, I would think, because, of course, expectations look forward, but in order to look forward, they have to look backwards. The only thing that you can use is past experience. So, in fact, the question is, how do you use past experience to anticipate the future, which you know is going to be different? So what is the criteria to judge the usefulness or obsolescence of historical income, historical information? And now let me ask this rhetorical question, but I think it's very practically relevant. We have two problems. One is, how should people go about forming expectations? And the other problem is, how do people go about forming expectations? We know that when you ask about what's the nature of economic growth is, and in every growth theory course you say innovation. Okay? Well, innovation means that the future is going to be different from the past, by definition. So, and one could stop there and say, okay, no one knows what's going to happen in the future. And say, Okay. Or one forgets about the change, and one says rational expectations, and you know that it's wrong, and the prices show you that it's wrong. Or you say the future is unknowable. But that doesn't work either, because on the one hand, people, actual economic agents, are making expectations. And the job of the analyst is to understand how they do it in practice. We need some understanding of how real people in the real world deal with this problem of anticipating evolving environments. And on the other hand, maybe, and an epistemologist maybe can help us a lot there, how should people, how we should, so that we can compare what we think should be done with what they do and think and understand whether that is going to cause a macroeconomic problem. Now, we all have the problem of spotting relevant structural change, and of course it's always, and when one sees an economy like that of Argentina, where these things, we have had structural reforms, and time again, or the idea of structural reforms. And of course, when you have that, you have two types of error, to simplify. One type of error is saying, well, it's all the same as usual, nothing is going to happen, and it does happen, and the other thing is anticipate that many things will happen when they are not going to happen. And it's clearly, and you see it all the time, this time the economy has found the new way to grow, maybe yes, maybe no, and we don't have, of course, a firm basis to do it. Now, in this situation, where there's no firm basis to form expectations, possibly if you want, the general opinion may be driven to a large extent by common sense opinion. In a sense, where do you put the burden of the proof? Greece joins the European Union, changes institutions, joins the euro, blah, 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 and does this and that and that. And Mr. A says, this is going to be fast growth. Mr. B says, I don't think so. Now, if Mr. A asks Mr. B for the proof, incontrovertible proof that things are going to happen, of course, you will not be able to convince anyone, but if Mr. B asks Mr. A, you give me the full proof that what you say is right, he cannot do it also. So maybe the third party listening to A or B is going to act according to where the burden of the proof is going to be, and that possibly has to do with common sense opinions or prevailing notions at the time. So, and it's clear that expectations in a changing context require determining some sort of starting point to guide behavior and subsequent learning. Call it, I don't know, Bayesian prior. But okay. Just say, well, if you ask me point blank, I will answer this, and then I see. But in the meantime, I'm making decisions. In the meantime, we're all making decisions. So, and that we talked a lot with Ricardo. That is linked to the problem of abduction, because the economic agent, as an agent, has to abduct from the structural changes that he has observed some sort of working hypothesis that would help him make decisions in the process in which he knows maybe that he is going to learn, but something has to be done to begin with. So, and one would think this sort of working hypothesis is likely to be simple and to make sense given previous experiences and currently accepted patterns of thought. So the irony here is that things that look straightforward at some point in time, obvious, you have to do this and that to growth, may be the very facts that lead to errors that are going to cause a cyclical reversion at some time. And I'm finishing. The expectations that lead to a crisis are mistaken, but that does not mean, I think, that they are arbitrary, that people get mad in a certain way, or irrationally exuberant. The bubbles are, I would say always, at least cases I've seen, you always had the argument, the dot-com bubble had its argument, the Argentine convertibility program had its argument, the US Great Moderation had its argument, the Japanese boom had its argument too, things that helped rationalize the behavior that eventually exposed, we understand was highly exaggerated. So, and often the facts that are interpreted exposed as signals of fragility at the time are confidence strengthening. That is, the world lends to you, and exposed you say, okay, it was very wrong to take those loans. When you see it ex ante, you say, listen, the world is looking at us favorably, so we should be happy about it and take the opportunity because they are signaling that they believe we have a good future. Okay. New instruments to diversify risk. Rising asset prices means either a bubble or confidence. You call it confidence ex ante, you call it a bubble exposed. High growth with low inflation, as the US and other economies had in the Great Moderation, that now is thought to be part of the bubble. At the moment, it was thought to be a sign of a structural change. So it's not thoughtless responses, but it's invalid models of the world, so to speak. So we have to deal with this, and I'm finished. So crisis put into question really deep features of economic organization and behavior, and I think they leave us with major issues for macroanalysis and policy design. One is, I would stress the word specific study of learning and expectations, aiming at practical, usable propositions. That is, it's not a matter of principle, it's a matter of fact, I think. How we as agents work in this sort of situations. Okay, there's something which is important for macroeconomists, parameters that determine the depth and intensity of propagation, because once a shock hits, how it spreads in the economy is a particularly critical question. Typology of crisis according to specific condition. I think that there is very useful work that can be done on that and policy implications and mapping of policy trade-offs. But the point that this meeting deals with, I think, it is the first one, which is understanding how people go about their day-to-day business in a world that they know and we know that they know that is changing, I think, is without preconceptions and rational or not rational or whatever. We would like, I don't know very much how, but I know that I think is one of the great topics that macro should address in order to improve its theories and its views about how crises emerge and how crises erupt. Okay, thank you.
Hay pocas revistas en castellano y en inglés sobre filosofía de la economía, y la verdad que es un orgullo que una la lleve adelante la Universidad, la Facultad. Y en particular agradecerle a Germán el enorme trabajo que está haciendo con la revista y con la jornada también, por supuesto. Well, so now changing language. My English is not very good. It's not nicely pronounced like Mary's English, and it's not so correct like Daniel's. But unless I think Argentinian people in the audience will understand me perfectly, so that's the good thing of this. This paper is. I wrote this paper with Gabriel Chedel, who is now teaching, so he's not here. This paper tried to be a contribution to clarify some inside debate of evolutionary and Schumpeterian thinking. This paper tried to address this subject, bringing complexity ideas and try to shed light on the different points that are now inside evolutionary thinking, which are very diverse, and they go to very different policy implications. So I thought, with Capelli, we thought that this was very needed to make some clarifications inside this current school that is growing very much during the last 30 years. So the paper is organized in three main building blocks. The first building block refers to kind of an ontology of complexity, and I will discuss this later. So let me present the blocks, and then I will give more details of each of them. So the first building block is on the ontology of complexity and the 5 dimensions that we identify as very present in different definitions of complexity. The second building blocks refers to two paths or two traditions in economic history that are in some way linked to complexity thinking. That does not mean that Smith, Marshall, Schumpeter, so on, think in terms of complexity ideas, but some ideas of complexity can be read in their works. So we try to look at those authors, the idea of complexity, and the third path actually has been identified by Metcalfe, an author of complexity thinking, of evolutionary thinking, and the other path, Gabriel and I are pushing this idea of the second path. So every comment on this topic will be very, very welcome. So, and this is the second path, and the second building blocks, and the third set of building blocks refers to taxonomy of evolutionary contributions, and in this way there are taxonomy of authors inside the evolutionary thinking. So let me go to the objectives. So this paper the aim of the paper is to mix these building blocks. We're going to try to show how the complexity thinking helps us to show different points of reference of the evolutionary authors and how they are linked to two main traditions in economic history. And then we will go to show how the different policy prescriptions they do are in line with their previous backgrounds and the way that these backgrounds are related to complexity. So, starting with the ontological assumption of complexity, we have read a lot of works related to complexity. A lot of them became from different disciplines, and we have read also a lot of works related to evolutionary thinking. Evolutionary thinking is trying to apply complexity to understand the structural change, to understand the innovation as a process to change and develop the economy. And most of the definitions of complexity that we found refers to a list of attributes that complex systems may have. They do not specifically say that if all the attributes should be there, or some of them, one of them, two of them. They do not say that. And also the different attributes of complex systems are all the time overlapping themselves, and sometimes they are referring to each other very much, and it's very difficult to distinguish them. Although we try to list most of them, and we try to group them in 3-5 dimensions that we find that repeatedly appears in all definitions. That refers to micro heterogeneity, different agents acting in a decentralized way, interacting themselves, and this is the second dimension: interaction, nonlinear dynamics, and diversions between systems, connections and informations. The network of connections has been a topic that is very present in all of the works. Also the network theory, the social network theory, gives a lot of material for formalization, this kind of complex systems. And finally, the 5th dimension that is present and probably the most relevant of all of them is emergence. The complex systems are characterized by emergent properties. That means that some things that you can observe in the some level of analysis, macro level, meso level, cannot be derived directly from the interaction from the micro level of the observation of a single element of that micro level. So the scale is important. The scale is very important, and this kind of systems actually shows multi-scale properties. So in this ontology, I would like to point on the topic of diversions, because it's a topic that is present some not in all definition of complexity, and it's a point that is not taken very much for the tradition, for some roots of the traditions in evolutionary thinking. So let's go to the second building blocks. The first tradition of complexity in building thinking, all of these points that we have read here can be read in several authors of economic thinking. For example, in the division of labor and innovation has been present since mid as a very important topic in order to coordinate activities, and it was also present in other authors. And this tradition, this first tradition, was discovered or pointed out by Metcalfe. Metcalfe says that ends with Hayek in a kind of Austrian road tradition of complexity, in which the focus is on coordination problem. The coordination problem derived from the division of labor, and the division of labor that goes to the division of labor in the production of new knowledge is related to all these authors, and give us an idea of complexity in the way that different agents, individual agents, interact and complement among themselves different portions of knowledge, for example. So innovation in this kind of tradition emerged like a combination, or is the innovation is a byproduct of coordination and interactions among firms and among individuals in economic systems. In this case, innovation is a byproduct of coordination. Coordination among different portions of knowledge give us innovation as emerging properties when different individuals combine the knowledge they possess. So this tradition, which is mainly concerned on the coordination problem, order problem, picks the idea of self-organization, of complexity very strong, in opposition to our idea that complexity also can be read in other set of authors that also starts with Smith but ends with Young, Kaldor, and also Hirschman or other authors of development school. In this kind of authors, the main subject of complexity they are looking at is not order, is not coordination, but diversion. Diversion paths among systems, among economies, among firms. So this is the two traditions that we have identified, and now okay, I'm sorry, I forgot this table. So we localize, we try to get some order in the ideas of the first path and the second path, and we put the first path on the quadrants of coordination and single economic system. The idea of Austrian school, the ideas of Hayek, differ from the idea of one economic system or single economic systems of non-economics. They do not believe on the diversion path, they believe in one possible order emerging from the interactions among individuals. The other tradition, which is more linked to the transformation problem and to the presence of diversions between different economic systems, we would solve that in this quadrant. We will go back to this quadrant later. So, this is probably the hardest slide because I guess there is no very revolutionary people here, but I will try to do this easier for you. So we identified 5 groups of contributions. We start talking about 5 groups of authors, but authors are very likely to put just in one box. So we are moving from the idea of taxonomy of authors and to taxonomy of contributions, because people change what they think and they don't like to be in a box. So the contribution are easy to put in a box. So the first group refers to the idea of routines and habits, and it's mainly formed by the works of Nelson and Winter from 1982. These works were focused mainly on firms' behavior, and they developed the idea of routines, like idea of how firms behave according to their own path, according to their own previous experience, according to their bounded rationality and a behavior, a procedural behavior, procedural rationality also. So they, in this kind of contributions, they are mainly focused on learning process at firm level, and they are their beliefs that structural change came from the changes inside the firm. The learning process of firms, the development of capabilities of firms, the connections between firms, that will give rise to structural change at the macro level. The second group refers to innovation systems. This a lot of people refer to innovation as a systemic phenomena. Nelson also has brought on national system of innovation, but Freeman and Lundman perhaps are the most relevant exponents of these groups. They developed the idea of national system of innovation, and how in the national system of innovation they are described how institutions and firms and universities and national agencies interact among them to give rise to new knowledge and innovation. And as soon as the interaction among these components are non-linear, they also say that there are possibilities of diversion between groups of systems or between countries. There are different national systems of innovation, and that's why we also can see difference paths of development between countries, or different paths of development between sectors or regions, if we took the idea of sectoral system of innovation, of local system of innovation. But here the idea that we want to push out is the idea that they took very serious the necessity of diversion, to take account of the necessity of diversion between groups. The third group refers to cumulative causation group. This is a group of contribution of evolutionary thinking that have been working very hard on the impact of the trade impact of innovation. Pavid, Dossi, Pavid, Soed have a very important book on the relation between innovation and trade and development. And as soon as they are taking the aggregates dimension, they also are taking the relevance of demand on growth. So they are looking at Keynesian, Schumpeterian, Cantorian source of growth. And as soon as they are taking this, they are taking into account the presence of these feedbacks between demand and productive structure, and structural change derived from the expanding demand. And also they are taking into account the presence of divergence path between countries. The fourth group, we call self-organization, self-transformation, is the group of authors that are closer to Austrian thinking. They think that the evolution of economy is the result of variation, selection, and retention mechanism, like in the biology evolutionism. And in this regard, they think that